this morning for what we're doing today. And we now move to something that we typically do every time we do this conference. We talk about career and moving forward in times of uncertainty. And we've got Steve Rossetti from DAPhealth, and he's a career development specialist. And we are talking specifically about courageously moving forward during times of uncertainty. Steve Rossetti, come on up. There you are.
All right, good morning, everybody. It's funny, I had a client who came in this week and he asked me to define sex worker. And, it was a big question. So I'm very honored and happy to be here this morning to talk about courageously moving forward during times of increasing uncertainty. And I think truly the last 2.5 years has been remarkably a huge uncertainty for most people. So a little about myself, as they stated, I work for DAPhealth. I'm the career development specialist. Before coming out here to the desert, I practiced for 27 years as a therapist back in Chicago. And my specialty was working with the LGBT community, as well as working with deaf and hearing impaired people, as well as working with addicts. So primarily what I'd like to talk today about is really, how do we move forward? Which becomes an extremely important thing. I'd like to state, if I ask a question and anybody comes up and they have an opinion, that we're respectful of one another. I think in this country, we've kind of lost the ability to be respectful. And so even if someone's opinion differs from yours, I'd ask that, we sit back and we listen. Sometimes I ask people, are you more of a talker or a listener? So right now, let me ask you, for all the people in this room, do you predominantly talk or do you listen? Everybody who's a talker, raise your hand. Okay. All right, a lot of denial here, and everyone else is a listener. So what we realize here is the ability sometimes when you listen to people, you learn a great deal. And I can tell you honestly, I've seen about 300 people since I've started working at DAPhealth. Many of them HIV positive, many of them long-term survivors. And I feel an incredible honor to listen to their stories. It's amazing when you listen to them, of people who were diagnosed in 1982 and 1983, and you ask them just the question, what was it like? And the floodgates open and the stories are incredible. Of shame, of despair, of anxiety, but certainly hope and resilience. So we're going to talk, how do we move forward, which becomes important. I believe an effective presentation really does 3 things. It educates people. We look at providing thoughts for people to think about things, and certainly to ask questions. So my hope within my 40 minutes of presentation that we're able to do this. Once again, if you have an opinion, we will certainly respect that. So before we get to the matter of the presentation, I have 3 trivial questions and Starbucks gift cards. We're going to test your brain. Now we're going to have people who are online as well. They'll have the ability to answer the first question. So the first trivial question, raise your hand, or if somebody types it in the chat box. Who was the shortest president of the United States? Give me his name and his height. Who was the shortest president of the United States? His name and height, sir. James Monroe. Great answer, but not the correct answer. Teddy Roosevelt, and I'm 5'9", I take offense to that. No, that is not the correct answer, sir. Not the correct answer, sir. Richard Nixon, no, his fingers were short, but not his body. Yes, sir. Well, great answer, but not the correct answer. Yes. George Washington, great answer, but not the correct answer. Yes, ma'am. Ulysses S. Grant, great answer, but not the answer. Okay. John Adams, great answer, but not the correct answer. Monroe, great answer, but not the correct answer. Yes, sir. Ma'am. Oh, she Googled it. Okay. Okay. Here we go. James Madison and his height. You are correct. Ding, ding, ding. Okay. Now, folks, I only have 40 minutes, so we got to go quick here. Yeah, it's funny. Last night I'm talking to one of my friends who's a psychologist back in Chicago, and first question was the shortest president. And as a shrink, his first question to me was, "Are you concerned about your height?" And I said, "Excuse me." I said, "As an Italian man, I'm tall. I had a grandmother who was 4'11". Next question. I know this is easier. In the show, The Golden Girls, Blanche Devereaux, she had a gay brother. What was his first name? Sir. Stephen. I'm offended once again. Great answer, but not the correct answer. Okay, someone's Googling it. Oh, any other guesses? I'm sorry. Okay. Once again, I'm short. The correct answer is Clayton Clay. All right, here we go. The last question. There's a famous book. The first line in the book states, "Life is difficult." Life is difficult, a great book. All right, folks, this is failing miserably. The Road Less Traveled, a great book. The first line in it is "Life is difficult." Okay, perfect. They won. There we go. So folks, as we go to the next slide, oops, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. It's not working. I'm doing that. Okay, there we go. Thank you. So as we look at the objectives for the presentation, identify changes that have affected everyday life, understand your reaction to these changes, and implement changes and identify resources to move forward. We have to realize the last 2.5 years what this really meant to people. It was, for many people, when we look at the word, surreal. You know, there are things that have happened, and clearly I think a lot of people had to ask themselves, is this truly happening? So we're going to talk about that. I really want the emphasis on the presentation, it's only 40 minutes long, to be on how do we move forward as a group of people, because we've had great challenges. So I want to look at that. We realize with COVID and monkeypox, clearly there's a correlation to many people who are long-term survivors of what they felt back in the 1980s. Pardon me? I'm sorry. Is that better? Okay, excuse me. So let's go to the next slide, please. When we look at the history of epidemics and pandemics throughout the world, I didn't list them all, but primarily ones where we lost millions of people. And I think what we have to realize in the 100 years, it has changed many things of how we do, the paradigm shift of thought. So in the sense of this, you have to think about that we think differently. When something like the AIDS crisis occurred, when COVID has occurred, we think differently. Our thought, our cognition changes. We also, how we feel about things, our emotions, how we interact with people. So it's comprehensively based when something happens, it changes us in many ways that we really don't think about it, but it's how we live our daily lives. I remember back, I came out in 1990 and I went out to a gay bar with one of my friends, and you know, everyone was talking about, you know, how you would get HIV and the verbiages that people used. It was kind of amazing. So I meet this guy in a bar and we're talking, and he turns to me and he says, he asked me the question, "Are you clean?" And I turned to him and I said, yeah, I showered right before I came out. And he then walked away. And I didn't realize I had insulted him. And I asked one of my friends, and he said what he was asking is if you're HIV positive or HIV negative, but just the depiction of, are you clean? And, you know, primarily of what we needed to look at back then. Let's go to the next slide, please. So when we look at the changes that affect everyday life, and we look at COVID, and then we look at monkeypox, as we saw in the 1980s, it was a moving target. The dissemination of how did you really get it? How do you catch it? How long does it last? There's all these questions that kind of came up. And we have to realize that for many people, and I think as Dr. Ritchie has spoken, that things change all the time. And even somebody, you know, who's very educated, you know, you're looking at the hypothesis of what happens. What we also saw with COVID is financial challenges. You know, people had lost their jobs. We literally saw unemployment that was the highest since the Great Depression. So when you look at that, it's, you know, we're home, we're, you know, the level of isolation. For many people with comorbidities, you know, the fear, if I go out, what does this really mean if I catch COVID? We also looked at death and illness, and clearly it was a hardship for many people. You know, the surrealness, though, came at times in many different fashions. I remember I went to 4 grocery stores and I was looking for toilet paper. And I thought to myself, who would have thought in 2020 that you couldn't get toilet paper? I ended up calling a buddy of mine and asked if I could borrow a roll. And he's like, this is unbelievable at this point. What we also saw is social unrest. So when you talk about and you think about all the things that were going on, we had COVID, we had isolation, we had financial challenges, and we also had social unrest. And at times what we saw was things that were happening. And at some point, you know, how do you move forward from that? So let me ask the question, folks, when you looked at the situation on January 6th, and you saw the insurrection, what was your first thought? What was your first thought when that came? Sir? 9/11, okay. Yes, sir. Okay, wonderful. Any other thoughts? When you read or you saw the news and you saw the insurrection, yes, sir. Right. So for many of us, we really had to kind of think in the conjecture of what does this really mean? You know, it's amazing, you know, at some point, the stress that we were all under. And that is, do I have stress personally for myself? Do I have stress within my relationships or my chosen or biological family? And is there stress in a societal manner? And we can certainly understand there was great stress, at least from the societal perspective, because it was just almost surreal when we really looked at that. So as we move forward, again, you know, the fear, the anxiety, you know, when someone talks about that we could have a civil war, you know, it's kind of a crazy thing, you know, thinking about this in 2022. So let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about questions that sometimes we need to. Since 2020, how has your life changed? If you could identify the most significant paramount thing of your life changing, what would that be? Any thoughts on that? Sir? The cost of inflation. Who would have thought we would have seen gas at almost $7? So when we look at this, we have to kind of look at the changes that have occurred. Your socialization. What happened to your socialization when COVID came? Well, for many people, they were isolating. Yes, sir. There was no public life. Luckily, I think what we did see was people learned technology. So we learned to Zoom, we learned to Skype. It wasn't the same, but it was something that we had to learn because that became our process of socialization. I was always concerned about people who live by themselves because at that point, if they weren't leaving their home, I had one client who said to me, I started talking to my dog and he started to answer back. So as we look at that, we realize again, it changed something. The level of depression and anxiety, I'm going to talk about this later, but how it really within our country within 2 years just skyrocketed because people were depressed for many reasons. We also have to look at our belief system regarding healthcare and government. How has that changed since COVID came? The belief in something and, the ability to move forward becomes extremely important. So let's go to the next slide, please. We realize the impact that epidemics and pandemics have had in our lives hit us in 4 areas: socially, financially, medically, and psychologically. So it's the paradigm shift of thought. I read an article that they believed at least 95% of Americans and American families were affected by COVID. A great number, that it was going across the board. I think we need to kind of look at this and how it affected everybody within this room. And that's the one thing that I think is extremely important. Let's look at the next slide, please. The overall impact the world had experienced as reported by the World Health Organization and the APA, the American Psychological Association. What we saw was the healthcare systems. For most people, what did your healthcare, how did it change? And I think when we look at that, it's the change of appointments. Most people started seeing their doctors via telehealth and Zoom. So it had a great change. We saw the economics of people change for a great deal. We saw structure changes, social changes. Once again, we were seeing people who had passed away. Many businesses. So when we look at this, the increase in anxiety, it literally, when we look at January, December 2019 to April 2020 to August 2021, we saw that anxiety tripled or quadrupled in these areas. We saw the same thing for depression. And so we realized once again that these changes are happening within the culture because of many things. When we look at the next slide, let's kind of correlate this to the impact of COVID on HIV positive individuals. And what we need to look at is, for some people, the uncertainty. We know for many people, no matter what the age, there's challenges. However, we know people who are long-term survivors, that there's a correlation of the retriggering of emotions and thoughts about the onset of HIV/AIDS and monkeypox. And the correlation that we see that affects people with comorbidities. We saw an increase in depression and anxiety. My first client that I saw that was HIV positive was in 1985. It was a trans woman. And I look back and I think about how far we've come, but the challenges that she had at that time. I remember I got into an argument with our psychiatrist because the psychiatrist did not want her to come and present as a woman. And it was just staggering how the psychiatrist and she and I went back and forth. I kind of did my own thing. I let her come as a woman and present as a woman. And yet, once again, it was things we didn't know, processes back in that time, the fears that we had. So when we look at increase in depression and anxiety, we see changes in medical services. How many people feel that medical services changed greatly since COVID? Raise your hand, please. Okay, the majority of the room. And so we need to look at how that has changed, the appointments, the modalities of how you're being seen. I know that many of the clients that I would talk to for career development at DAPhealth would tell me, I'm frightened if I had to go to the emergency room, what that would look like. So we understand, again, the process of greater social isolation and loneliness. And we realize people who are socially isolated are more likely to become depressed. And at some point when they become depressed, we realize that sometimes their health care can certainly change. And we need to realize that. Let's go to the next slide. I'm always concerned in regards to the sense of stigma. You know, in a particular concern about older people with HIV, because we realize that stigma affects people's quality of life, self-image, behaviors, and addressing medical or psychological needs. So when we look at this, we need to look at isolation, loneliness. We need to look at seeking treatment because that becomes important. The lack of understanding. You know, a lot of times people used to say to me, people just don't understand. Fewer opportunities to work. What we clearly saw that there were some people who they needed jobs, but they didn't want to go out to jobs where they would be interacting with people. You know, they didn't want to go to a hotel and be at a concierge desk. They didn't want to be a cashier. So we realized that that became a little more difficult for employment. We also realized sometimes there was bullying, there was physical violence, there was harassment. We also saw health insurance that doesn't adequately cover mental health treatment. So there are lots of things that were going on. Access to competent care can be a barrier in some locations. Do we have enough doctors here in the desert? No. You know, it's something that we could look at and kind of understand that, you know, people were concerned and anxious about things. So let's go to the next slide and understand trauma a little, because I really want to talk a great deal is how do we move forward? So trauma, it's an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. But what we see sometimes is unpredictable emotions. We can have flashbacks, we can have strained relationships, physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. So the questions that I like to pretty much ask people, do you feel these events are triggering similar emotions you experienced with the HIV and AIDS crisis? Was COVID spurring these on for some people? Can you identify some physical changes due to your emotional stress? You know, we realize stress is very challenging for most people, physiologically, emotionally, psychologically, so we need to kind of look at that. And are you feeling stuck? The one question I like to ask people is, are you feeling stuck or hopeless? Re-engaging socially, sexually, and psychologically, because that becomes a big thing that we really need to look at. All right, folks, let's go to a quote and let's go into moving forward. You guys are a quiet group. You're scaring me here. I know this is not the easiest information to disseminate. So let's go into good news of how do you move forward? You know, as a therapist, I always used to tell my clients, how can we change something if you're not happy with it? How can we move forward? So quotes that I love. Shame needs three things to grow: secrecy, silence, and judgment. And when we look at this was a researcher, Brene Brown. Her specialty is shame. And for many people, again, in the LGBT community, for people who, you know, went through the HIV/AIDS crisis, shame could have been a big part for that. So we need to look at that. One statement that I love is judgment is only effective if you believe it. So the process of shame and absorbing that. So let's go to the next slide as we're going to move forward and we're going to start living fulfilled. So let me explain some things real quick, and then I'm going to open it up to some questions. I don't want to trivialize moving forward that it's easy or it's done quickly. I think we need to kind of understand how it is. So I'm going to make some recommendations that I believe can help people move forward and for all of us to have a better, happier, more authentic life. First thing, understand your circle of influence. This literally was written by a psychiatrist in the 1970s, and he talked about the correlation between depression and anxiety in your life and the people around you. So he referred to it as the solar system. So you're the sun and all the people around you in your life. It could be biological family, chosen family. It could be people, neighbors, people you work with. And he would ask us that you draw yourself in the middle of a piece of paper and all the people around you who are in your life. You would write their names and then describe the relationship that you had with each and every one of them. And it's amazing because he said the correlation is that in your circle, in your solar system, in your circle of influence, if these people were negative, rejecting, if they were abusive, if they were critical, the correlation to that and depression and anxiety in your life. So understanding your circle of influence becomes extremely important. Finding your tribe. So the sense of finding your tribe really becomes, if I look at the definition, a social division in a traditional society consisting of families or commodities linked by social, economic, religious, or blood ties with common culture and dialect. I'm a firm believer. Being in Palm Springs for many people is finding their tribe. Being around people who understand you and speak the same language. You have to realize in the early 1900s, many people, when they came over to the United States, such as my family from Italy, we went to Little Italy in Chicago because those were our people. Those were our tribe, and those were the people that we interacted with. So finding people, I have some friends, a couple, they live in Alabama. They've been together for 20 years, and anytime they go to a function at their neighbors, they pretty much tell them that they're friends. One of the couple is HIV positive, and he has to travel 2 hours to get compassionate care. So the tribe becomes extremely important. Let's talk a little about creating a working relationship with your healthcare provider. It's essential, folks, that you have a physician or a healthcare provider that you like and or love, because the relationship that you have with your doctor is essential. Many times I'll ask somebody, tell me what you think about your doctor. What I want to hear is, I love him, I love her, because that becomes an important facet, truly, of good healthcare. There should be a level of equilibrium with them. So I always say, develop a love affair with your doctor. It becomes an important point. Identify an advocate. For many of us, we have, it's called the white coat effect. When you go and you see your doctor, you're anxious. And for many of us, if you go, I always say, bring somebody with you, because at times if you don't hear something, someone may hear something that you didn't. And especially when you're talking about serious illnesses or diagnoses, it's important to have somebody who advocates for you. Your responsibility, though, is that you need to have your questions written. You need to be prepared and be able to go into your doctor and feel like this is a relationship of equilibrium. We also have amazing organizations and agencies here in the desert. HARP, DAPhealth, the Center, Borrego, Let's Kick Ass, all of these organizations, wonderful organizations, get involved and know your community becomes extremely important. For some people, we want to look at seeking out a psychologist or therapist for therapy or counseling if needed. It's an important thing that we really, truly, at some point in our life, have the availability to move forward. So a couple minutes and I will be done, and I'll open up to any questions, but what I'd like to talk about is your ability to have gratitude. Do you have gratitude in your life? And what does it look like? The other thing, I'm trained as a CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapist, and sometimes we have to kind of understand our core beliefs, our dysfunctional assumptions, and our negative thoughts. So people in this room, raise your hand. How many people identify themselves as an optimist? Okay. How many people identify themselves as a realist? Oh, wow. And many of you are a real optimist because you raised your hand twice. And how many people identify themselves that predominantly, cognitively, you think is a pessimist? Now, one person, okay. I'm happy about that. I'm not sure I believe it, but I'm happy. You know, you have to realize, folks, it's the constraints of how we think. Have you ever known someone who always complained? Yes. What was it like to be around them? Okay. You just wanted not to kind of leave them on the side of the road. You have to realize the formation of what we think about life is how we see it. And so the important is your cup half full, half empty, or right in the middle? What I also like to talk about is writing your own story. So currently I'm in the process of writing the book. And the book is about writing your own story and the ability not to be drawn into things that were taught, things that were, you know, through society, through maybe some religion, through mom and dad, but to write your own story, to understand what makes you happy. The Rockwell painting is an incredible painting, but we need to add different formulations of what the Rockwell painting looks like. And that becomes an important thing. Learning to believe in hope and change. I think one thing, talking to some of the long-term survivors, it was important when they talked about hope and change. And we have to realize that the constraints of this is hope is a feeling. Hope or change is a behavior. So we need to look at that. For anybody sitting in this room, including myself, you have to ask yourself, what has stopped you from wanting to have the life you've wanted? And it's a huge question. Imagine big, folks. You know, I always think, you know, one process of CBT therapy is, you know, as you think, so you become. Imagine big. So my last slide, setting the tone for your day. When I ask all of you to try this for 1 week, I'm not giving a refundable guarantee, but I want you to look at this and ask yourself 5 things. Number 1, I identify and am grateful for 3 things I have in my life. So every morning when you get up, I want you to identify 3 things. To move forward, it's a collective, comprehensive process. So I want you to be thankful for a person or people, for your animal, you events, objects, and or processes. So I want you to understand the ability to have gratitude in your life every single day. Cognitively, it changes us moving forward. Number 2, plan a day that consists of feeling happy, grateful, and at peace with where I am in my life. The process of how I feel about something. Every day, are we supposed to be happy? Absolutely not. But do we want to be happy for the most part? Absolutely. Do we want to feel a level of peacefulness? So the feeling becomes important, and the steps that I take to move forward. I create joyful experiences that enrich my life and make me laugh. How many people laugh at least once a day? Okay. And who taught you how to laugh? Yourself. Okay. The process, again, of having laughter in your life, the body chemistry actually changes when you laugh. And once again, we want to kind of move forward and every day experience some level of laughter. If it comes from talking to someone, you know, I always tell people, do something every single day that you enjoy. You should experience a vacation every day. I have a daily practice that keeps me grounded, relaxed, and at peace. So very quickly, let me ask you this question. How do you know that you're at peace? You can sleep at night. So sleep has a great correlation. Sir? Your mind stops racing. Excellent. Anybody else? Let me understand. You know, I'll ask that sometimes when I was in practice. I would ask the question, describe to me peace for you. And it's a really interesting question because it kind of makes us have to think about what is peaceful for us. You know, when am I peaceful? Yes, sir. A state of mind with no anxiety. Absolutely. It's interesting. It's how many of you, when you truly get into a deep sleep, how many times have you literally felt you were falling? That's when you're getting into a deep sleep. That's when your skeletal system was saying, because we know with stress even sometimes that we don't sleep well. How many times a night do you get up? How many times do we look at that. And the last thing that I'm going to ask folks, and I appreciate your time, I'm going to perform random acts of kindness daily. The importance of giving back. And, we need to look at that. And as we look at so many processes, I'm going to end with this, folks, move forward. And I think every single day, it's just a step. When we realize a single event can change life. We have Rosa Parks that would not give up her seat, and we had Stonewall. A single event can make a huge change. I want to thank you very much for your time. You've been a great audience. I'll be around all day. Please feel free to ask any questions, and I appreciate your time. Thank you. Oh, I have to, okay. Yes. I'm good. In the interim, I'm going to ask one more trivial question. On the average American does this 22 times a day. What is it? Farts. Great answer, but that's not the correct answer. It's much higher. Yes, sir.
Could you describe cognitive behavior therapy and the training for it from the Beck Institute in Philadelphia?
It was back in the 1960s, and the premise of CBT was the change of cognitive structure. If you look at it and you look, every therapist and psychologist has different modalities of how they were trained, if they were psychodynamic or psychoanalytic, or CBT. For someone with, who's a CBT individual, on the average, they may see someone for 5 to 25 sessions, depending many times on the constraints of health insurance. But it's the whole premise of, with one of the sides, talking about the structure of how your belief system is, negative thoughts, and the connection towards that. So it becomes really important, when we look at someone, I asked the question earlier, if you have anybody in your life is extremely negative, and you look at the energy it takes to be around them. It's a sense of, again, the negative individual. And there's great research that shows that someone who is an optimist, believe it or not, lives longer and has less medical and psychological needs, in the sense of, because they look at life differently. Yes, sir.
I love your suggestion of the challenge of falling in love with your doctor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure out how you do that
Okay.
in a 20-minute session every 3 months.
Okay, great. Well, once again, that's a great question. I think falling in love with your doctor, the doctor that I had before I came to Chicago, I loved her, because let me explain our relationship. She gave me no more than 15 or 20 minutes, but when I went in, she asked me how I was doing. She took copious notes, and we had an interchange. I asked you earlier of, listening and talking. So listen, or if you can ask yourself this question, when you go in and you see your doctor, who should be listening more and talking more? Think about that. Yes, sir. So let me kind of identify this. I think it's the art of negotiation really is when both parties walk away feeling that they won. So I'm going to ask you the next time you go see your healthcare provider, if you're walking out of the office and you feel like you have lost, it's not a good level of negotiation, and you're not falling in love with this person. And so your responsibility, I believe, as a patient is to be prepped with questions, to understand what is your objective for this appointment. And once again, if you're an anxious individual, bring in, a partner, a buddy, a good friend, a family member to be your advocate, because sometimes the advocate can ask the questions. I used to take my mama out to her doctor's appointments, and when we would be driving home, I would be quizzing her on what the doctor said. And she pretty much grasped maybe 10 to 20%. So that's why an advocate, bringing someone with you, becomes important. But ask yourself as you're leaving his or her office, am I falling in love with this person? Not literally, but, and the other litmus test, would you recommend your doctor to somebody else? Sir.
I'm going to put in 2 plugs for some wonderful activities.
Please, thank you.
The first is the Pause Cruise, which is about to go on its 17th year. It's a tribe. We have focus groups amongst the men and women and say, where do you want to go next year? And people say, I don't care as long as I'm with the group. It's become a tribe of people from around the country.
Perfect.
It's not related to Pause Magazine. The other thing is, for the past 10 years, I have been doing the laughter clinic at the Mizell Center, which is short form improv, fun and games. And we just laugh hysterically and have a great time. And that's something that can be replicated at other places. So if you ever have a chance to see some improv and learn about things, you can unlock your brain and learn to think outside the box and laugh with others.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Folks, before I end, one last thing. I'm going to ask you the trivial question. The average American, how many, complain? Great answer, but not the correct answer. One more try, folks. I want to give these damn cards away. So let me ask the question once again. On the average, an American will do this 22 times a day. Laugh, great, but not the correct answer, sir. The cell phone, 22 times an hour. Sir, you're on. Very good. Say thank you. Thank you, but that's not the correct answer. Smile. All right, for time, I'm going to have to give it away. It's open your refrigerator. Folks, I appreciate your time. Laugh, love, live. Thank you.
Whatever we want to do, yes. We're not sure if we fist bump, do we, whatever. Steve Rossetti, thank you so much. And I don't know if anyone has discovered this. You can play along at home if you need to on this one. But if you see a slide that you like on the screen, you can, at least on the iPhone, you can start to take a picture of that. And then you'll see these little rounded lines around the text. And you can will actually recognize the text, and it will copy it to the clipboard. And then you can actually have the real text of what was presented today. And I know the last 2 slides, especially the moving forward, living fulfilled slide, I thought was very powerful. And I hope you had a chance to capture that. And I hope we can share that at the end. Jeff?
And this will be recorded in our.
That's right. Yes, the entire presentation today, you are being recorded, and you agreed to that at the beginning. But yes, it will be archived, and the YouTube channel is the Heart PS YouTube channel. Okay, great. Good. All right. Now we're going to do the LKA, the Let's Kick Ass